Okay, Matthew 5:19, Jesus said, "Do and teach God's law." This is God's law number 33, the law of love. Hello, everybody. I'm Jim McCotter. Welcome. Here is God's law number 33 from God's law book of Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 22, verse 1 through 4. If you see your neighbor's ox or sheep or goat wandering away, don't ignore your responsibility. Take it back to its owners. If its owners does not live nearby or you don't know who the owner is, take it to your place and keep it until the owner comes looking for it. Then you must return it. Do the same if you find your neighbor's donkey, clothing, or anything else your neighbor loses. Don't ignore your responsibility. If you see that your neighbor's donkey or ox has collapsed on the road, do not look the other way. Go and help your neighbor get it back on its feet. End quote. God's law is unique, unlike any other laws in the world. It is a law of caring for others and a law of love. Man's laws are only punitive or oppressive and often unjust. God's law is not only just, it is the only law in the world that commands to love and how to love. Jesus and the Apostle Paul summarize it in one word: love. The Apostle Paul said in Galatians 5:14 and chapter 6 and verse 2, quote, "For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself." And then he said, share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. End quote. In Romans 13, 1 through 7, Paul describes what biblical civil servants, God's servants, do by carrying out justice. In short, do what is right and God's civil servants, quote, praise you. Do what is wrong and God's civil servants are, quote, agents of wrath to bring punishment on wrongdoers, end quote. Romans 13, 1 through 10 is not describing secular government, but biblical government. I wrote the 10 reasons why we know this in a previous Substack series on Romans 13. In Romans 13, 1 through 7, we fulfill God's law by submitting to God's civil servants. In verses 8 through 10, we fulfill God's law by loving one another. Paul's demand to fulfill God's law did not stop at verse 7. It continued in verse 8 through 10. God's law is all about love. Romans 13, 8 through 10 says, quote, "Owe no one anything except to love each other, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this one word, quote, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law," end quote. Pastors who teach Christians that once they are saved they no longer need to keep God's law are theologically blind. We cannot and do not keep the law to get saved, but we keep the law because we're saved. That's why we keep the law, to love Jesus and others. To not keep God's law is to not, quote, love the Lord your God, nor your neighbor, end quote. As Jesus himself said in Matthew 22, 36 through 39, quote, "Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses?" Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself," end quote. Think about that next time someone says to you that you no longer need to keep God's law. Have you ever thought how beautiful God's law is? Psalms 19, 7 through 11 describes it. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, bringing joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are clear, giving insight for living. The fear of the Lord is pure, lasting forever. The judgments of the Lord are true. Each one is fair. They are more desirable than gold, even the finest gold. They are sweeter than honey, even honey dripping from the comb. They are a warning to your servant, but a great reward for those who obey them." End quote. Now, this law we're looking at in Deuteronomy 22, 1 through 4, needs no commentary. It is self-evident and obvious that it is another of God's law on how to, quote, love your neighbor as yourself.